Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Knox. I am the chair of the Digital Media and Communication Department at COSTAATT's Ken Gordon School of Communication, Creative, and Digital Media. Your instructor for today's news report writing workshop is Mr. Roddy Batchasingh, who is a senior lecturer at COSTAATT for 14 years. During his time at the college, he has lectured over 20 courses in journalism, public relations, communication studies, and literature. He was also the recipient of the British Council's Chevening Scholarship and holds a master's degree in international journalism with distinction from City University of London. Given his professional experience in journalism, corporate communications, advertising, consultancy, and education, I am pleased to hand you over to my colleague, Mr. Roddy Batchasingh.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. And again, as I said at the last workshop that I did, when someone gives you a glowing introduction, you have a lot to live up to. So I hope that, in fact, I do live up to that glowing introduction. Thank you, Ms. Edwards-Knox, for that excellent introduction. And thank you to all the students who are here today from various schools. We're very, very happy that you're able to join us today. And we know how precious your time is during the school hours. So we are very, very grateful that you're able to be with us. And we hope to give you a very positive experience about COSTAATT today, and particularly about writing news and news reporting. So let me start by saying a few things. I want it to be the case that this session is interactive. I know it isn't always easy to come on and speak on your mic. So I will say, please say things on the chat. If you can turn on your mic and give a contribution, we'd like that. But it perhaps will be easier to say something on the chat. So you can go ahead, please, and make your comments in the chat. There'll be instances where I'm asking for people to make a comment on the chat, just to see what your feedback is and see what your opinion is on what we're looking at. But we will definitely be using chat significantly or several times during the course of today. Sophia, is it possible that you can make it so that I could share my screen, please?
That's already the case.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Okay, wonderful.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, I saw we have 70 students from St. Francois.
Yeah, St. Francois. Special good morning to St. Francois, and thank you for the significant turnout. We're very, very happy to have all of you today, and special good morning to all the schools represented today, Siparia West and St. Joseph's Convent, San Fernando. Happy to have multiple schools in the session today. So what we're going to be looking at today is writing news. And I want to make something, and I just want to say this before I start sharing. I want to make something clear about journalism and about news reporting and writing news for... I think people might have the perception that you're writing for the newspapers, but you're not writing for the newspapers. You're actually now writing for websites. So I want you to think of yourself as writing for the websites for the national newspapers of Trinidad and Tobago. So there's the Trinidad Guardian, there's the Trinidad Newsday, there's the Trinidad Express, there's Loop. But beyond that, I want you to think of digital media, because you're essentially also writing for the digital platforms of media houses. So you're writing for social media sites as well. And you don't have to be part of traditional media in the sense that you don't have to work for a media house. You can also become a person who posts news. So something happens, you find out about it, and you share that information. And over time, if you develop some credibility, people will look to you to find out what's happening in a particular situation. So I don't want people to think that you're writing for newspapers. You're not writing for newspapers. You're writing essentially for digital media platforms. You're writing for social media platforms and social media websites. Hard copy of news is, in 20 years, we won't be holding a newspaper in our hand to find out what's happening with the news. We'll be looking at our phones, we'll be looking at our devices, we'll be reading it off screens, but we still will be reading. We still will be reading. We may not be reading huge quantities of text, but we still will be reading. And also, anything that you read will have a multimedia dimension to it. And having a multimedia dimension to it means that while you're reading, you'll be able to click on a link to go to a video, right? Or you'll be able to click on a link to hear some audio. So the great thing about the future of writing and journalism is that while you can read about the story, you can also watch a video about the story. You can also see interviews done by people about the story. You can jump to other media houses or other news sources talking about the story. So any content that you're pursuing about a particular story, you can get a lot of different angles covered on it. So I wanted to start by saying that. And looking at the chat here, I want to just ask, what would you say was the biggest news story happening over the weekend? Not necessarily in Trinidad and Tobago, but biggest news story coming to your phone over the weekend. You could, if you can't say it on the microphone, just put it on the chat. So anyone can put it on the chat, but the biggest news story happening over the weekend, and it does not have to be a news story that happened in Trinidad and Tobago. So good, I'm seeing things. Massacre in Gaza, big. Internet cut off in Gaza, that's good. That's good. So, of course, there's a war going on. There's a war going on. It's a massive confrontation with heavy death tolls. The whole thing started earlier this month on October 7th. But when I say the whole thing started, of course, this whole confrontation between Israel and Gaza has had a lengthy history.
So,
yeah, Camelia, go ahead.
my teacher, Miss Ali, said it's not a war, it's a genocide.
Yeah, well, you know, so that's the thing, right? To call it a genocide, news houses have to be, to a certain degree, objective in the way that they report it, and news houses have not been entirely objective. They have not been entirely objective about how they do it. Western media has been perhaps biased towards the Israeli cause, but there are definitions of what a genocide is, and it might be approaching, because the number of civilian deaths, a genocide, but it has not officially been described, say, by historians yet as a genocide, you know, but it does have the potential to grow into one. It certainly is a massive humanitarian crisis. Yeah, so good. So people talked about, but I wanted to ask if there was any other big news story. Let me just see. Let's see what other big news stories there might have been. So we definitely talked about Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. But any other massive news story taking place over the weekend? Right. Thank you. Thank you. So Matthew Perry of Friends died. Right. Do people in class know who he is? I'm presuming that you do, but I don't like to over-presume. I don't like to over-presume, so I want to get some confirmation. Right. So it's not every series that was every television series that was done 20 years ago can survive 20 years ahead, right? So this television series, Friends, stopped running in 2004. And sometimes and that's nearly 20 years ago, because 2024 is 20 years ago, right? So it ran for 10 seasons from 1994 to 2004. Not every series that started in the 90s and ended in 2004 can stand up to the test of time and be watchable today. But in fact, Friends has found a new audience among younger people, and some people, and I'm hoping that people among this group might have seen some episodes of Friends. But so Chandler, Matthew Perry from Friends, died on Saturday. The details are not entirely fully known. We know that for a very, very talented person, he had incredible problems with drug abuse and drug addiction and so forth. He said in his autobiography that came out last year that he had been to rehab 15 different times, that he had done detox over 65 times. So his death was a big story, I would say. It was a big story. Now, the thing is, I'm going to write a quote here in the chat, and I want you all to read the quote, right? Okay, so I put a quote in the chat. I want you all to read it. It says, "One person's death is a tragedy, 10,000 deaths is a statistic." One person's death is a tragedy, 10,000 deaths is a statistic. Now, the interesting thing about that is that one person dying has the capacity sometimes to affect you more than hearing 800 people died or 2,000 people died. Now, of course, when 2,000 people die, the news goes in and looks at individual stories to get us to understand, to humanize a terrible situation. But this quote here about one person's death being a tragedy and 1 million deaths being a statistic or 10,000 deaths being a statistic has to do with the human capacity, the human mind's capacity to understand the intricacies of a particular person's suffering and feel for that person, to empathize with that person, to relate to that person, to feel some universality with the suffering that that person might have gone through. So even in the Israeli-Gaza or Israeli-Palestine conflict now, hearing the individual stories is what is causing a tremendous amount of hurt for the people listening to those stories. Now, I'm going to start sharing my screen so we could start looking at how we do some news writing. And I want to start with a German word. Hope everyone can see this. It's a German word called Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude, right? It's a concept, and I want to find out from people if they've ever heard of this concept, right? So it's a German word. It means damaged joy, right? It's a joy that people might take in taking pity on other people's misfortunes. Now, not to do with someone's death like Matthew Perry, or not to do with something as painful as the confrontation taking place or the war taking place, genocide taking place in Israel, Palestine. But let's just think of this, right? Joy in taking pity on other people's misfortunes. Now, the taking pity part is the part that I want you to pay attention to. It's not you take joy in other people's misfortunes. It's taking pity on people's misfortunes that causes people to feel a certain degree of fulfillment. So you hear someone's car got bounced, and that's what we say in Trinidad. The car got in an accident, so your car got bounced. say how terrible, and the bonnet can't close, and how much you say it would cost, and the insurance is going to take a long time to pay you back, and it's going to mean that you don't have your car for many days, and how will you get around while your car is not working? Your pleasure comes from knowing that your car is still in great shape, or it's still shiny and new. Now, another way to think about this, I heard someone say this, if you are driving on the highway, and one side of the highway is filled with traffic, and your side of the highway has no traffic, and you're driving smoothly, and you're driving at a good pace, and you're getting to where you need to get to, and other people on the other side are in bumper to bumper traffic, and they're not moving at all. You feel sorry for the people on that side, but you also feel happy that you're not in that traffic. You feel happy that you're not in that traffic. So you've seen memes like that where people say, I like other people's drama, but I don't like to be involved in drama. I like watching other people's drama. I like watching other things happen to other people. I don't wish it on them, but if it happens to them, I like spectating, and I like seeing it, and I like paying attention to it. I like absorbing it. I like watching it. But I don't wish anyone harm, but I'm happy I'm not involved. I'm happy that somehow this pain does not involve me, right? So that's one of the things that causes people to be drawn to media and to be drawn to news. Because very often, the way that a news agenda is put together, and I just want to talk about, I want you to look at this quote here. If it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads. That's a quote that has been around in journalism for a long time. If it bleeds, it leads. It's because bad news is interesting to people. Bad news is interesting to people. If you go to a restaurant and you sit down to eat in a restaurant, and there are two couples at the restaurant, and one couple looks very happy, and they're talking, and they're smiling at each other, and they're having a good time. And then there's another couple at another table, and you hear someone yell at each other. You hear someone, an argument is starting. So you're hearing an argument starting, and you hear a few obscene words. You see someone, perhaps a woman, gets up angrily and throws a glass of water at the person and then leaves. Where are your eyes? Are your eyes and is your attention drawn to the couple that are having a good time, that having a peaceful, happy evening, or your eyes are drawn to, and it's not that you are a person that says, oh, I wanted to go to the restaurant so I could see a couple fight, that wasn't your plan, that wasn't your intention, but you went to the restaurant and this incident occurred, and you couldn't help but notice it, you couldn't help but observe it, and while it was going on, you couldn't help but continue to notice it and continue to observe it. So I want people to understand that when it comes to news is about covering conflict. It's about covering things that go wrong. So you don't necessarily say, the weather, there's never a news report that says the weather was excellent today and there was no crime. There is a news report that says, and last night, 4 people were killed in Belmont. So there would be news on that, and there'd be news on bad weather and flooding and that sort of thing. So I want people to understand that. Now, that's not to just say that news is all about damaging the collective mental health of a nation by constantly telling you terrible things happen. Some people feel that, and this is why sometimes people feel negative towards the media, because if you say, well, the media is always telling us terrible things. But the reason that they're telling you terrible things is that they're trying to shine a light on wrongdoing. They're trying to shine a light on wrongdoing. They're trying to keep people focused on terrible things happening so that our attention and our public scrutiny of terrible things happening can cause things to get better. And I want you to remember that. You're trying to see if you could embarrass the collective community into better behavior. People with power and authority, if you could embarrass them into working harder to do right by the country. So that's where it comes to this quote here. The goal of journalism is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And the afflicted are very often people who don't have a voice, who don't have power, the people who are unemployed, children who are being abused, single mothers, the homeless. So people who are afflicted, people who are disadvantaged, people who have been victims of injustice. The purpose of journalism is to comfort the afflicted and afflict or harass or pay attention to the comfortable. And who are the comfortable? The people in power, people with authority, the wealthy, business owners. So people, and when I say business owners, I mean essentially the very, very wealthiest of business owners, not small business owners, people who own conglomerates. So you comfort the afflicted and you afflict the comfortable. And by doing that, you're hoping to achieve a more just society. So sometimes you say, well, the media is focusing on terrible things happening. The reason you're focusing on terrible things happening is that you're trying to embarrass the authorities into working harder and doing better so that terrible things will not happen, right? So I wanted to make that point before we started to talk about the actual news writing, so that you understand what the whole goal of this is and why we even do it, right? So I want you to just remember this: 10 key elements of news, 10 key elements that makes news, right? So not everything is newsworthy, and not everything ends up in a space where many people can see it, right? So sometimes, say in my own life or in your own life, something major happens. And you say, well, my aunt died. My aunt died of cancer. And say, well, if my aunt died of cancer, it's a major occurrence in my family and in my extended family. But is it necessarily national news? It's news to the people who know me and who care about me. And it's news to everyone who loved my aunt and cared about my aunt. But is it necessarily national news? You could post it on social media to inform the networks of people who knew her. But for people who don't know her, they might say, well, I'm sorry to hear that she passed away from cancer, but in truth, people die from natural causes, heart attacks, diabetes, cancer, HIV, AIDS, every day. And I'm sorry to hear that it happened, but it's not national news. It's not national news, right? So there are things that will make, and by the way, it doesn't mean that it's not impactful on your life, or it's not painful to your life, or it doesn't affect you. It's just not something that 1.4 million people need to know. And, the entire population needs to know. And in fact, many of us, if a relative passes away, also are highly respectful of the family's pain and understand that mourning relatives need privacy. So sometimes someone passes away and you really aren't that eager to go tell everyone. You're not eager to tell everyone. So you don't want it necessarily to be known to massive volumes of people, But certain things will make a story a newsworthy story. And these are some of the elements, right? So conflict, naturally, conflict and confrontation. And in fact, in political circles, there's usually conflict and confrontation between the government and the opposition. So that's something that gets written about quite a lot. Strikes, workers and management arguing about wages. Wars, of course, what's happening in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia, and what's happening in Palestine versus Israel. Court cases, usually a source of conflict because you have two parties arguing before court. I want to look at something like prominence. So if a cabinet minister, someone who works for the cabinet, suffers a stroke, right? So there was a cabinet minister called Max Coffey, who suffered a stroke. If he suffers a stroke, it's more likely to be national news than if your uncle suffers a stroke, right? Now, a person who suffers a stroke and does not die is now entitled to a certain degree of privacy. But if you're a cabinet minister and you suffer a stroke, you're almost obligated to tell everyone, and it will be reported because of who you are and because of your prominence, right? If something happens in our country, we care way more about it than if, say, it happens in the Bahamas or in Honduras or in the Philippines. So proximity, something happening in your country matters to you much more than something happening, say, in another country. So that same cabinet minister who suffers a stroke, if our Minister of Education was to get very sick and couldn't do her job for 6 months, it would matter to us much more in this country than if that happened to the Minister of Education in the Bahamas. So if that happened to the Minister of Education in Bahamas, if that Minister of Education had suffered a stroke, you might just hear about it or you might not, because the proximity is not there. Drama. Sometimes a news story, and you all will remember the bomb scare that happened earlier this year in April. No one was killed, no bombs went off, but a huge amount of disruption and dislocation took place. A big wave of anxiety swept through the country and swept through the parents of all those students affected, and the students and the teachers and the loved ones of those teachers. So there was a lot of drama, and I'm just going to share a story here just to show, right? So everyone's seeing this headline: bomb threats shut down schools, causing widespread disruption and panic. So the bombs did not go off. The bombs did not go off, and thankfully, bombs did not go off. No one was killed, thankfully. But a massive amount of dislocation, a huge amount of anxiety, a huge amount of drama. And this is a small example of how you might write news. This is from the CNC3 website. People know CNC3 News. CNC3 is part of a wider media network called the Guardian Media Limited, which is the Trinidad Guardian and a number of radio stations and, of course, social media platforms. But CNC3 News, also, you can go on their website and read news. This is just two simple paragraphs. There is a small typo in it, but I think for the most part, it captures what happened that day. It said there was widespread panic as a threatening email sent to dozens of schools forced an education sector shutdown and mobilized a national response. And I think mobilizing a national response, it meant that a lot was happening because of these bomb scares. Thankfully, there were no injuries and no devices were found, but there was widespread condemnation of the emailed bomb threat from the Education Minister, Prime Minister, Minister of National Security, and the police service. So in this is 2 sentences, it's 2 paragraphs, but it's only 2 sentences. But in 2 sentences, essentially, and this is what news writing is about, in 2 sentences, you pretty much get most of the story. Now, we could add further details. We could say which specific schools were affected, what time it happened, where the students had to go to be safe. You could say all that. But in 2 sentences, the main events of the story have been reported, right? So going back now to the PowerPoint, I just wanted to ask, I believe St. Francois was not a school that received a bomb threat. Is that right? I just want to confirm that. Anyone from the St. Francois team, I know we have 70 students with us, can write in the chat. Whoever is closest to the computer could write and tell us if St. Francois was directly affected by the bomb scare. or your teacher, or anyone can turn on their mic and say, while I'm waiting for that response, yeah, okay, so you were affected, you did receive an email. I wanted to ask the students who were affected by that story, did you look at the news that evening? Even if you don't normally look at the news, you might have looked at the news that evening, that particular evening. If you don't make it a habit of watching the news, and I know many of us have quite varied schedules, so we may not sit down and watch the news, but you followed it on social media quite a lot, you might have made an effort to look at the news, you might have made an effort to look at the newspapers the next day, but you were particularly interested because of your personal involvement in the story, the personal dislocation that the story created for you. Yeah. Going back now to the right. So I want to talk about how we actually write news stories now. And we're gonna do an exercise later on in today's workshop where you have an opportunity to try and follow this structure, right? But this structure is called, right? This structure is called the what structure, right? So in a news story, when you're writing a news story, and it doesn't matter if you're writing it for a digital media platform or if you're writing it for a website, if you're writing it for an actual newspaper, this is roughly the structure that you would follow. You tell us what happened, then you tell us the H in the what structure is how, who, when, where, why, right? Now, it isn't always possible to tell us why something happened. It isn't always possible to tell us why something happened. In the story of Matthew Perry dying, we don't absolutely know how he died. We know he died from drowning, but we do not know. And most of the stories said that he had drowned in his jacuzzi. But most people would be able to prevent themselves from drowning in shallow water. So we know that he drowned, but we don't know what made him drown. So we don't know if he was intoxicated. We don't know if he had drugs in his system. There's going to be a toxicology report. They have to do a very extensive autopsy and then a toxicology report to determine if there were drugs in his system that might have made it impossible for him to save himself, and that's why he might have drowned, right? So we don't know how as yet. We know that he drowned, but we don't know why he drowned. We don't know why he drowned. But we do know what happened, which is that he died. We do know who died. We know when it happened, and we know where it happened. And then we move on to additional information. And we're going to look at a news story now to get some additional information. And then T is to tie up loose ends. Now, what I want people to understand about this whole what structure is that, and I'm going to use an expression here. The expression is serve dessert first. Serve dessert first. So whenever it comes to writing a news story, tell us the most interesting, the most valuable information at the beginning, at the very beginning. Tell us the most interesting and valuable information at the beginning. So a person who reads 2 paragraphs of your story can stop reading the story if they have to, and they could go and tell someone about what went on. They would have received enough information. They would have received enough information from your story that if they had to stop reading your story, and you have to remember, the age that we live in now, people are not trying to read 9 paragraphs. They're trying to read 2 or 3 paragraphs. So if you can get people to read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, you've actually been very successful in a news story. And that's why you have to, the best writing, the most interesting writing has to happen in what happened and give us the pertinent information, the most relevant information. What happened? Where did it happen? Who did it happen to? When did it happen? If you can say how it happened and why it happened, great. And then you start giving us further information. People who are interested will read on and will read the whole story because they're particularly interested in this story. But it's not the case that every single person on the planet is interested in every single story. So therefore, some people might just read right here. you cannot put the best and most important information in the last few paragraphs because people may never make it to those last few paragraphs. But they will read the headline, they will look at the picture, and they will possibly read the first two paragraphs. Many people just read the headline and look at the picture. But if you can get them to read those first two paragraphs, or just that first paragraph, you've done very, very well. So that's the watch structure. I think you all might know who this person is. Beyonce Knowles, very, very famous and gifted performer. And notice what she's doing. She's kicking some water. So we're gonna look at a story now about someone who got some water kicked on them. And you might know who the person is. I'm hoping that I could play a short video. So I'm just gonna try and play this video here, see if the video could be played. Right. So what has happened here, current Minister of National Security, his name is Fitzgerald Hines. He's also a member of Parliament for Laventille West, had visited the Beetham, as many people know it, the Beetham, which is also Beetham Gardens, during a situation where there was some flooding. And while he was there touring the flood affected areas, a resident had gotten angry with him because he said that you came to the area to look at the area with media. This is a publicity stunt. You've been a member of Parliament for a very, very long time, and these problems keep happening, and you're not doing anything about it. So that angry resident ended up kicking some flood water on him. So that's what this story is about, right? And the councillor for the area is also accompanying Mr. Hines, and he also gets doused with some water as well. The video is about roughly 3 minutes long, so I'm just going to try and play it. I'm hoping wherever you are, you have audio to be able to hear it. People could say on the chat if they're not hearing it or so, but I'm hoping that most of us can hear it and see it.
Attorney General Fitzgerald Hines has confirmed that he gave a statement to the police after flood water was cast upon him by Beetham residents earlier this week. But the Laventille West MP says he is disturbed by comments made by the wider public about the community following that incident. He is urging the wider public not to judge that group by the actions of a few. Again, here's Peter Christopher.
I jogged off a bit to avoid being further wet with that murky and dirty water, and I continued my business, and then I left the Beetham because I had to go and make myself clean. I mean, I needed to clean myself up, and I did just that. But I'm here today again, working for the people. And that
Laventille West MP Fitzgerald Hines recounting the moments after a group of Beetham residents kicked floodwaters upon him. The acting Attorney General admitted that as the water splashed upon him, he did not think of himself as a government minister.
The way I felt on that day, I didn't feel as though an MP was being assaulted or a minister was being assaulted. I felt as though a man, me, a proud man, a proud black man, was being assaulted and offended, because to throw water on me, even if it's cold and clean, is offensive, much less to throw contaminated water upon me.
The minister confirmed that he was called in by police to make an official report, and they are currently investigating the incident.
The police are constantly doing their work. The police, having seen the video of the assault on a minister of government, at the time I am acting Attorney General, although I'm a member of Parliament, there are offences known to law for interfering with a public officer. Having seen that, the police contacted me and asked me for a formal report, which I issued, and the police are doing what they have to do. They do it routine.
But the Laventille West MP said he was taken aback by some of the comments made about the Beetham community following the incident.
The large majority of the people on the Beetham are not of that. They do not like that, and they know that that's not the way to proceed, and it remains a handful. And it is unfortunate. So I want the handful to know, when you do that, you are causing your neighborhood to be stigmatized and to be marginalized as a consequence. My job is to make sure you are not. But I've seen comments from the national community, horrible comments about all of the people of Beetham, which I take a little concern with, because I know many of those people are not of that.
The Laventille West MP could not say if those seen in the video would face charges soon, stressing that the matter was in the hands of police. Peter Christopher, C News.
All right, I'd just like if someone can confirm, or different persons from different schools can confirm that they saw the entire video. So the persons from Superior West, if you could just confirm that you were able to see and hear the video. Persons from St. Joseph Conference San Fernando, if you were, and anyone from St. Francois, if you could just confirm that you were able to see the entire video.
So can you repeat, please?
Yeah. Or you could just say in the chat, because I know that audio is going to be tough.
Can you repeat, please?
Or just I wanted to confirm that you were able to see the video that I was showing.
Yes.
Right. Thank you, St. Francois. You were able. Yes. Thank you, Miss Edwards-Knox. And yes, great. Good. So let's see what made this news, right? Prominence, because the person is a cabinet minister. Conflict, there was definite conflict there because his constituents had grown angry with him. So there definitely was conflict there. Not a natural disaster, but a disaster for him personally. Proximity, in the sense that this is not happening in Guyana and it's not happening in Costa Rica, it's happening in our country. Timeliness, well, the thing about timeliness is when something happens today, you expect to hear about it today. And when something happens yesterday, you expect to hear about it soon. So one thing that media houses try to focus on is getting that news to you quickly, right? You can argue that it's novelty to a certain degree, and I want to emphasize this to everyone here. You do not need to have all the elements here for it to be a news story. You do not need to have all the elements here. So there's no real progress that they're writing about here. Progress is to do with advances in science or in advances in the way a society functions. So advances in law, advances in science. Progress, it's not really about progress. But there is drama. There is a certain amount of human interest. It does happen in our country. It does involve a prominent person. It does involve conflict. It involves consequences, who or what is affected. And it is a novel experience in the sense that you don't see government ministers you might see verbal confrontations. You might hear people shout at a government minister in anger when they're doing a tour, or you might hear people say things to members of parliament when they're doing a tour and saying, we just only see you when election time come around and you just only come to ask for a vote, and when you win, we don't see you again. So sometimes you hear that verbal confrontation, but this was more than a verbal confrontation. This was an actual, and in the law, what the person did, the constituent did by kicking water on him, is actually seen as an assault. It's actually seen as a crime. So it's not that you had to hit someone in their face or kick someone. Throwing dirty water at someone or throwing any water at someone can be seen as an assault, right? So we're gonna look at a story now. Remember, and this is why I was asking if you all had heard the story. Remember Fitzgerald Hines, who was not, by the way, the Minister of National Security at that time. He was not. He is now the Minister of National Security, but at that time, he was not the Minister of National Security. He is a former policeman and he is a trained lawyer. So those are the things that he brought to the job. He was once a policeman for a number of years, and then from being a policeman, he went to study law and became a lawyer and so forth, and then eventually got into politics. And that's why he was acting Attorney General at the time, because the Attorney General at the time, Faris Al-Rawi, was out of the country, so he was the acting Attorney General. But he said the police contacted him to get a statement. The police contacted him to get a statement. So he had to give a statement because the police had seen what had happened. And he gave a statement. And then the person who had kicked water on him was arrested, right? The person who had kicked water on him was arrested. And this is that person's situation. The news story I'm about to share with you is the story of that person going to court, right? So I want you to look at this. We're going to read parts of this story here. I'm just making sure everyone can see this. Right. So the headline is Snake Goes to Court for Assaulting Hines with an Excuse. So the event, the water was kicked on Hines August 14th, and now September 25th, which is roughly a month later, the person who kicked this water on him is going to court, right? So let's just read the first. I'm going to leave this up. I'm not going to read it out loud. I want people to read it, and then we're going to go through it. Just up to here. From years of broken promises to the very bottom here, which is water the parliamentarian. You're going to read it, and then I'm going to read parts of it, but I want you to take a moment and read as much of it as you can. I'm giving everyone about 30 seconds to read it. Okay, everyone. So I think all of us have had a little opportunity to at least read this early part of the article. It says, years of broken promises by Member of Parliament for Laventille West, Fitzgerald Hines, to the people of the Beetham Gardens, was what led to one man splashing muddy water at him during a tour of the area last month, right? So let's just look at this sentence, right? It tells us why this might have happened, and it also tells us what happened, which was what led one man. So this was the reason. Years of broken promises by the Member of Parliament led to one man splashing muddy water at him during a tour of the area last month. So it recalls the event that happened. We don't need to know who the man is just yet. We need to know the incident. So what happened is more important than who kicked the water, right? If I told you Richard Marcel went to court, or Richard Snake Marcel went to court, you go like, okay, for what? What did he go to court for? And who is he? I don't know who Richard Marcel is. But if you say, the man who kicked the water on Hines now, you say, oh, okay, I remember that incident. So you'll remember the incident. But you wouldn't necessarily know who it is, because that person is not necessarily a person of prominence. He's not known to us. Fitzgerald Hines is known to us because he has been a government minister and he has been a public figure for so long, and continues to be a public figure. So whether you want to know who Minister Fitzgerald Hines is or not, there is a likelihood that you will know him. There's a very, very good quote about a very, very famous family in the United States. You all know who they are, Kardashians. So this very famous family, and maybe they're not famous for any good reasons, but they're a very famous family, the Kardashians. There's a very good quote about them. They say, a person on social media said, everything I know about the Kardashians, I've learned by force. Everything I've learned about the Kardashians, or everything I know about the Kardashians, I've learned by force. When you're a public figure, even if you're a person who doesn't want to know about that public figure, the information is going to find its way into your head. So public figures don't necessarily need an introduction. I don't need to explain to you who Kamala Persad-Bissessar is. I don't need to explain to you who Dr. Keith Rowley is. I don't need to explain to you who Colin Imbert is. You already know. Whether you want to know or not, you already know, right? But I do actually have to explain to you who Richard Snake Marcel is, because you've never heard of it. So that's why in the opening line it says, what led to one man splashing muddy water at him during a tour? you're more likely to remember the incident than you're likely to even know who the man is. Then it goes on to say, what triggered this whole news story to even happen is an event. And the event is that the person has been brought to court to answer for his actions. And that's why we're now hearing about him. So his attorneys are speaking on his behalf. Marcel gets an opportunity in court to confirm, to plead guilty, and he does in fact plead guilty. He doesn't try to say that he wasn't responsible for it. There's video of him doing it, so there's no point in him saying that he didn't do it. So he does plead guilty for it. And what they're trying to do is soften the sentence or soften the punishment by saying this is why he did it. Not that he didn't do it. He's not denying he didn't do it. He's just saying why he did it and why he behaved in that way. So that's why the story starts with years of broken promises by Member of Parliament for Laventille West Fitzgerald Hines to the people of Beetham Gardens was what led to one man splashing muddy water at him during a tour of the area last month. So that's one way that this story begins, right? I did want to just say, I'm just gonna give you one of the quotes here. It says the court police prosecutor said on August 14th, and if you think about this structure now, remember we talked about the structure, what happened, who it happened to, and who were the people involved, when did it happen, where did it happen, why did it happen, and how did it happen. Now we're looking at additional information and tying up loose ends. So if we go to additional information, this is when we start to get quotes and we start to get context and we start to get additional information. But if you had just read these two paragraphs here and nothing else, you would know that the man had to go to court. You would have known that he had been charged with assaulting Hines and using obscene language. You'd know who it was now. You'd know his age, 31-year-old Richard Snake Marcel. You'd know that he appeared in court, that it wasn't the case, and many times this happens in Trinidad, something bad happens and no one's ever arrested or charged. No one's ever arrested or charged. Or sometimes something bad happens, and even though everybody knows who it is, person just said, well, leave it alone. Just like, let's not pursue it. Let's just treat it as a negative incident that happened. And I'm not going to give a statement to the police. I don't want any further actions taken. But here, further actions were taken. The person who kicked the water is now facing consequences. So if you just read these two paragraphs and you read nothing else, and this is why writing news is a very delicate thing, and you have to do it well. You cannot take your time. You cannot do a long intro. And I know, and I want people to understand this, news writing is a very specific type of writing. News writing is a very specific type of writing. The writing most of us are trained to do at secondary school and in university is academic writing. And when we do academic writing, we do an intro, and then we do a body, and we develop each paragraph in the body, and then we do a conclusion. And that writing definitely has its place when you're writing essays. But when you're writing news, it's very different from when you're writing essays. When you're writing an essay, or you're writing a short story for creative writing, it's completely different from when you're writing news. When you're writing news, you are going to presume that the person may not read beyond 3 paragraphs. And therefore, if they only read 2 or 3 paragraphs, they can walk away and go have a conversation with someone and say, hey, you heard the man who kicked water on Hines get charged. In court, he had to go to court. And they charge him with obscene language and assaulting the minister. And that's from just reading essentially 2 sentences. This paragraph is a sentence, this paragraph is a sentence. The language is simple. No one's trying to show off by using long words. The language is simple. The information is fast. The writing is fast. It comes to you quickly. The information comes to you quickly. You don't have to read through 400 words. to arrive at the information that you've received. And that's what news writing is. That's what news writing is. Now, a person reading this story may want to know more. And if they want to know more, it's all here. It's all here for you to know if you want to know more. But if you did not want to know more, then 25 seconds or maybe 20 seconds would have given you everything that you needed to know. And if you can write really well for news, you're probably good at writing for social media. Because social media is not necessarily about long form writing. It's about writing clever things in short, fast ways. And that's what news writing is about as well. It's a very specific type of writing. It's not something that works in every single place. Academic writing is really important. Writing a proper essay is really important. But news writing is a specific type of writing. And as you know, there are many different types of writing. You could write a screenplay for film. You can write, you can be a playwright and write a script for actors to act out on stage. Writing takes place in many different ways. The bulk of the writing that we do is academic writing. But if you're a news writer, this is the type of writing you're going to do. Yeah. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I wanted to emphasize that. So when you get to the middle parts of the paragraph now, we start hearing, you get quotes from people. So here's Marcel himself, right? He was quoted as saying, and the expletives are bracketed and it says expletives. So you have to imagine what Marcel might have said here. But it basically says all you're doing nothing for we, for effing we, is only talk from earlier and the people of the area not getting effing anything. Marcel was quoted as saying, right? So for people who want to get the details, and a lot of people actually find that the best part of a story is the details, is the color and the atmosphere, right? Is the color and the atmosphere of the story. And we get to know who Marcel is. We get to know some of his situations. And towards the end, and this is the last two paragraphs, it says, in the end, Marcel was fined a total of $400 by Magistrate Sonara Toon on the charge of assault. So in total, he was fined $400. On the charge of assault, he was fined $300 and given 1 week to pay. Or in default, he will serve 2 weeks simple imprisonment. On the obscene language charge, he was ordered to pay $100 or face a term of imprisonment of 1 week. So if he didn't pay the $100, you had to go to prison for 1 week. If you didn't pay the $300, you had to go to prison for 2 weeks. And in total, he had to pay $400 in fines. Possibly, and it actually says here, in passing sentence, Magistrate Toon said she was taking into account the fact that Marcel pleaded guilty to the offenses at the earliest possible occasion and therefore did not waste the court's time. In addition to that, she said he was cooperative with police and did not resist them in any way. So if you go through and read the story, you kind of understand why he's only fined $400. It's a very soft fine for kicking water on a government minister. And then the last sentence is, he faced an additional charge of possession of 5 grams of marijuana, which was found in his home last Friday when he was arrested by officers of the Port of Spain division, back when it was illegal to have 5 grams of marijuana. I think 5 grams is now, I'm not entirely certain, but I think 5 grams now would be legal. And just to say, when you look at, and I'm just going to take it here. When you look at what happened, and I want you to think of the structure of a news story. What happened and how, who, when, where, why. The rest of the article is additional information where you add context, and last bit, you tie up loose ends. If a person doesn't get to this part of the article, and by the way, no piece of writing is perfect. You can argue that this paragraph should have been much higher up, the actual punishment, but the writer was trying to explain why this fine was so low, right? But and you can have the Trinidad Guardian, Trinidad Newsday, and Trinidad Express cover the story and write completely different stories. And a different newspaper might have actually led with this, which was the man who kicked water on Hines was only fined $400 for doing so. So different, and this is when you exercise your news judgment and you ask yourself, which story is the most important story for the readership to know? And different media houses take different angles, different writers take different angles, and that's why if you read 4 stories on the same, 4 different articles on the same story, you'll get different versions. You'll get different versions, which actually makes it a little more exciting too, because you get to cover different angles. I'm now going to look at, by the way, I'm just gonna ask, do we have any questions at all? Does anyone would like to ask a question or make a comment? I'm gonna just give an update on that same story with Richard Marcel. He actually was killed last year in a police shootout. So the same guy who you got to know as being charged with kicking water on Minister Hines says snake dies in police shootout. Man who kicked dirty water on Hines during Beetham tour killed. This is the fella here. And I'm just letting you read the first 4 paragraphs. Richard Snake Marcel, the man who kicked dirty water on current National Security Minister Fitzgerald Hines during a tour of Beetham Gardens back in August 2018, was killed during a shootout with police on Tuesday night. Right? So again, you know what happened. You could read further for details. And this is, I don't know if people have ever been to the Trinidad Express website, but you don't ever need to buy a hard copy of the newspaper anymore. You can basically go to the websites and get the contents of the newspaper. And the great thing is, any article written in the last 10 years, you Google it and you'll probably be able to find it very easily. So if something happened last year, the year before, you Google it and you can find it in the Trinidad Express. And when I say something that happened in Trinidad and Tobago and that was reported on, you can go and find it. And it's an excellent resource to be able to familiarize yourself with the history of a particular story. But for this man who had kicked water on Hines, he was killed in a police shootout. Residents, some of whom admitted 35-year-old Marcel was in the life, have given the assurance that they will not be staging any protests on his behalf for now. Police said that around 10 p.m., officers of the Port of Spain Division Task Force were on mobile patrol in Beetham Gardens when they said they came under heavy gunfire. Officers fired back. When they investigated where the shots came from, they found Marcel bleeding from gunshot wounds about the body. They took him to the Port of Spain General Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. So the opening paragraph tells us that who got killed and how they got killed, and that he was killed in a shootout with police. But what's also important in a news article is getting multiple views. So this is what the police said. The police said that they were on patrol and shots were fired at them and they fired back. Beetham residents interviewed yesterday gave a different version of events. One man who did not want his name used said he was liming with Marcel minutes before he was killed. He claimed police showed up that night in a black unmarked SUV. Around 9:15 p.m., the police car came with its high beams on, and we don't know the place while, and it's Beetham, so we say it's gunman, and everyone just scattered. And what they said was that the police shot him and that Marcel did not have a gun on him. Marcel did not have a gun on him. So that's the argument. And then, and I want to emphasize something here. With news stories, in an effort to be objective and fair, you can't only put one side of the story. If you have to pursue getting multiple sides of the story. And one side of the story is what the police said, And another side of the story is what the residents said they saw, right? And what the resident said is, or this particular resident said, we didn't know if it was police at first, but when they, or this part here, Snake ran up his street, which is 17th Street, and the police just kept following him, and they hung out the window and shot at him. So according to this particular resident, it wasn't that the police were fired upon. It was that the police essentially came looking for him, right? And another person says, let me be real, he lived the life, he stopped to look after his son for the betterment of his son. But this person, in a sense, is admitting that Richard Marcel was involved in what she terms, he lived the life. He lived the life, which meant that perhaps he was involved in some type of criminality, or he was involved in some type of complexity that made his life not a straightforward one. So he may have, and I know some of our students from Siparia West said that they had an interest in studying criminology. Anyone studying criminology will understand that a person who is involved in crime doesn't always decide that that is what they want to do with their lives. Sometimes you end up in a life of crime. So perhaps he was involved in a life of crime. His death still is, he's a young person. He died at the age of 35. He had children. So sometimes in Trinidad and Tobago, people can be a little bit callous about when the police kill their police involved killings. Some people on social media said it's good and we want to see police killing more people, but strictly speaking, that's not the way justice is supposed to work. It's not the way justice is supposed to work, and there is some complexity there. And the good thing about that news story, which is a crime news story, is that the journalist made certain to find out what the Beetham residents wanted to say. The Beetham residents are not named. They're not named because they are worried that if they are named, the police might victimize them, and therefore they ask for anonymity, and the journalist preserves that anonymity by saying a Beetham resident who asked not to be named had this to say. Yeah? I'm just looking in the chat here. All right, great. Good. So I want to move on now to another story. This one I want to keep quick, but I just wanted to show another type of story. Right. So this story here is called Homeless Man Evicted from Under Curup Interchange. Homeless man evicted from under Curup Interchange. Right, and this takes place earlier this year, 8th of March, 2023. I just want people here to read the opening part, the Ministry of Works and Transport. You're going to read from here, the Ministry of Works and Transport, till about here. Okay, so the sentences are short, the language is simple. It says the Ministry of Works and Transport evicted. Now it has it in quotation marks, evicted, because eviction is actually something very specific. To evict someone from their home, a landlord can evict a tenant from their home for not paying rent. The bank can repossess someone's home if you stop paying your mortgage. But you can't really necessarily evict a homeless man from under a bridge, since technically he does not own that bridge. And he doesn't own that space that he's living in. But it says here, the Ministry of Works and Transport evicted a 42-year-old homeless man from underneath the Curup interchange on Wednesday morning. Ministry officials removed the man's chairs, cardboard boxes, and other belongings just after 9 a.m. Newsday was told the order to remove him came from the engineering department of the ministry. Newsday spoke with the man who gave his name, and The Newsday made up a name for him. It said Ramesh, not his real name. Said he had been sleeping beneath the overpass for the past 2.5 months and that he would return. Now, the reason that the Newsday gives his name as Ramesh is because, and there's an editor's note here, it says Newsday has chosen not to publish the real name of the man referred to as Ramesh because of the incriminating statements he made about himself. So in this article, he says that he's a car thief. He has stolen over 500 vehicles in his life. So because he says that, the Newsday took a decision not to give his real name. And then it talked about his time in prison. So again, we move from what happened, and I want to move to the middle of the article where you get some color and atmosphere, right? So we know what happened. 42-year-old homeless man was evicted or removed from the Curragh interchange. And I know that some of you, when you're driving on the highway, and if you're in the backseat of the vehicle or even the front passenger seat, if you look under bridges on the highway or flyovers on the highway, sometimes you see that you could tell that people are living under that bridge. And you see some of the things that you see here, the man's chairs, cardboard boxes, and other belongings, right? I'm just going to give you till here. So I'd like people to read from, in the meantime, he managed, till here, right? So I need everyone just to read this section here. And then after you read that section, I just want people to put in the chat what they learned in that section about Ramesh, right? Okay, everyone. So I think most of you would have read these couple of paragraphs. I'd like, please, if you all could, anyone or a few of you could put in the chat details that you pulled out from these paragraphs that you read about this homeless person who was living under the bridge at the Curragh interchange. So just looking in the chat, anybody could say anything about what they read in these details here. And don't be shy, just say what you learned about Ramesh. Just anything that you learned about him, and you could just go ahead and say it in the chat. Or you could turn your mic on and say it if you want. All right, so I'm not getting anyone to say anything on the chat, but what I want to emphasize is that it went from the person being a homeless man. All right, great. Someone's saying something, Chan. Good, thank you. Thank you. He was trying to change his life around. Thank you very much. Good. So we saw that. He's trying to change his life around. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Anything else that anyone wishes to say? That's good. That's good. But what happens here is that he becomes a three-dimensional person. He goes from being a 42-year-old homeless man, which, by the way, already gives us an idea of who he is. Because we know his age, and we know that he's homeless, and then homeless people in Trinidad and Tobago are usually called vagrants. So we can kind of develop a picture. But then we find out more information about him. We find out more information about him. We find out that he had served 21 years in prison. He had been convicted of arson. He has one relative that he could rely upon, which is his elderly mother in Tobago. So he said he didn't want to rely upon her, so he went and fended for himself. Right. Thank you, Melvina. Thank you for letting me know. San Francisco experiencing Wi-Fi challenges, and we'll try to reconnect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Melvina. Right. We get a description of him from himself when he says, "I's a criminal to my heart." All right. But he's trying to turn his life around. He says, "I just see about the rubbish for KFC and for Subway, and they just pay me with food. I don't thief, I don't rob, I just beg for my little dollar," right? And he actually said he's coming right back under the Curragh interchange to live. Right, asked where he would call home now that he had been evicted, Ramesh said, "Right there, going back. As I tell you, as a criminal to my heart." So he, to a certain degree, he embraces lawlessness, right? Then he says that he's HIV positive, which again, you have to take him at his word. You don't know for certain if that is the case, but he's being interviewed. He says that he's HIV positive. He said he's stolen over 500 vehicles in his life, and that's why Newsday took the decision not to put his actual name, because he does give his actual name. But what these additional details partly makes this an article worth reading, because you hear more about the person behind the headline. So the headline is homeless man evicted from under Curup interchange. And then while we hear what happened, who it happened to, where it happened, and when it happened, and why it happened, we now in the middle part of the article, we start to hear more about the actual details, the additional details, and that's why I'll go to this part of the what structure. The what structure asks you to look at the additional details, additional information, and then tie up loose ends. Additional information and then tie up loose ends. So while additional information is not as crucial as what happened and the facts of what happened, it actually can make the article very enjoyable to read, because you get to find out all the details about the human beings involved in the article. And there's a very good phrase about news that says news is people. News is people. So news isn't necessarily numbers. And remember how I said at the very beginning, one person's death is a tragedy, but 10,000 people dying is a statistic. But one person, humanizing that one person, and that's what a news article attempts to do sometimes too, humanize that person, give those details, that makes us feel an emotional investment and an emotional attachment to a particular news story. Yeah. People might care more about the plight of homeless people upon reading that article. Some people might care less about it. Some people might say, this man is a criminal and he's doing something terrible and he's commandeering a space that does not belong to him and he's dirtying that space and he's a public health threat and he shouldn't be living where he's living. And some people look at it and say, he's living a very hard life and he needs help. He's living a very hard life and he needs help. He doesn't have many choices in life. And that's why homeless persons need the intervention of the state to rehabilitate their lives. But what the article is partly doing is giving an insight into the lives of homeless people. And by looking at the life of one specific homeless person, the person isn't entirely representative at all, but he is a homeless person, and some of what has happened to him has happened to others. Yeah? Now, Melvina, I don't know if you can confirm to me whether St. Francois has been able to rejoin us, because I do want to start getting closer to the exercise that we're going to be doing. I'm doing one last prep to help everyone get ready for the exercise. I think the two young ladies from St. Joseph Convent, San Fernando are with us for sure. And I think everyone from Siparia West is with us. Melvina, if you can confirm either in the chat or by turning on your mic. Yeah, I'm not seeing St. Francois either, so we might have just lost them. But I'll move on to where the activity, or at least prepping people for the activity. And if there's anything, when St. Francois joins us, I'll try to get them to I'll prep them for the activity as well. Right, everyone? So one of the things that I wanted to emphasize about telling a news story versus telling a traditional story. If you're telling a traditional story, and I want you to pay attention here, if you're telling a traditional story, the beginning of the story sets the scenes and introduces the characters. The middle of the story develops the story, and then the end of the story brings the climax of the story generally. So the ending, people read a story to get to the end, in a sense. Whereas when you're reading a news story, when you're reading a news story, you're not necessarily reading to get to the end. But when you're reading a traditional story, you are reading to get to the end, because the end is usually where the peak of the story is, the climax, the ending, right? And that's why some people can feel quite disappointed with an ending, because they said, well, the story was going so good. The characters were interesting. The story was interesting. I was really invested in it. I was really following it closely. And then the ending was a little bit flat. So sometimes the ending can be weak. And some people say, well, I was disappointed in the ending, but I like the characters and I like the story. A news story is a different setup altogether. Now, I'm going to look at, and I want people to understand why I'm looking at a few stories that are children's stories that presumably everyone knows. Presumably everyone knows. And I say presumably everyone knows because we might have heard these stories growing up. And it's when you're teaching children to learn how to read, people read these stories. So like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, or Little Red Riding Hood, or Hansel and Gretel. Those kind of traditional children's stories, right? And because we heard it growing up, the Three Little Pigs and that sort of thing, because we heard it growing up, many of us know the story by heart, even though we haven't heard it or read it for many, many years. Many of us have not heard it and read it for many, many years, but we kind of know the story by heart because we heard it as children, right? So this story here, Little Red Riding Hood, I just need to get some confirmation in the gallery. I want to confirm that people know this story or know the outline of this story. Little Red Riding Hood. People kind of roughly remember it from their childhood. So you could either say in the chat if you kind of remember what Little Red Riding Hood is about, because we know how the story goes. We'll read just the opening part of it, and then we'll jump to the major details, and then right. So yes, some of us remember it. We do remember it, and of course, if you have a little cousin or a little sibling or a little niece or a little nephew, and they're giving you a lot of trouble, and you said, come, let me give you a story. Let me tell you a story. Most of us could tell this story without even consulting a book, because we kind of roughly remember the details. Right? This actually was written by, sort of formalized, because this tale exists in many different cultures and in many different countries. And then it was, there are two brothers called the Brothers Grimm, German brothers, who collected all these stories in a collection of tales and fables and so forth. And sometimes when you read their stories, it's a little bit darker and harsher, the versions, but different versions and softer versions of the stories exist, and over the years have been handed down from generation to generation through children, right? So I just read in this paragraph here, which says, once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little riding hood of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else. So she was always called Little Red Riding Hood, right? One day her mother said to her, come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are walking, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't peep in every corner before you do it, right? So the only reason I read that opening is just to jog your memory. It's just to jog your memory. So most of you kind of remember how that story went, right? I'm not going to go through all this here, but I just want you to remember the details. She goes to her grandmother with the cake and wine. Mother says, be very careful. LRRH is Little Red Riding Hood, right? Little Red Riding Hood meets the wolf, has a conversation. The wolf makes a plan. The wolf sends her to pick flowers. The wolf goes and eats Granny and puts on her clothes. Then Little Red Riding Hood gets to Granny's house, and they have that conversation about what big ears you have and what big teeth you have, and then the wolf eats Little Red Riding Hood too. So the wolf ate the grandmother, and then got into the grandmother's clothes, and then ate Little Red Riding Hood. And that's how a traditional story would be told. And of course, they are rescued by a huntsman. Huntsman comes and rescues him. Huntsman finds wolf. Huntsman kills wolf. Huntsman cuts the wolf open. Out comes Little Red Riding Hood. Out comes Granny. Huntsman fills wolf with stones. The wolf dies. Granny eats cake and wine. And what these stories that are children's stories are meant to do is to impart a lesson on the children hearing it. So Little Red Riding Hood says, as long as I live, I will never leave the path by myself to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so. Because the mother said to her, do not leave the path, do not run, do not, this bottle of wine that I'm sending for your grandmother, don't run because the wine can fall and could break. And do not leave the path, don't do anything that might cause you to court danger. And there is an ending and a sort of a lesson that's passed on to children who read it, right? If this was a new story, and this is what I want you to see, if this was a new story, it would be told in a completely different way, And I'm going to ask you to do it with another series of stories. So I'm going to give you different story choices, and you'll pick one and you'll do it. But I'm doing one here with Little Red Riding Hood, and you'll see the example, and then you could try out the example, right? So the huntsman is really, really crucial. He needs a name, so we're going to give him a name, and we're going to treat it like a Trinidadian situation. So we're going to give him a name that you might encounter in Trinidadian newspapers. So that's the who in the story. The who is the huntsman. The what is he cuts open a wolf and rescues Little Red Riding Hood. Where does this happen? At Granny's house. So say where she lives. When did it happen? Yesterday. So we're reporting what happened yesterday, today. And on social media, you would actually report that this happened a couple of hours ago, or might have said that this happened 30 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, because you're reporting on social media. You might do a Facebook Live, you might do a TikTok Live to show the events happening. So you might speak in the present tense. If you're reporting what happened yesterday, you'll speak in the past tense. Develop the story and add quotes and sourcing. So here's how it turns out, right? The headline is Huntsman Frees Girl from Wolf's Stomach. You see how a news story is very different from the way a traditional story is told. The traditional story is establishment of characters. Who's Little Red Riding Hood? What is her mission? Her mother is giving her something to do. She's trying to get to her grandmother. So the story doesn't peak towards the end until you get to the end. In a news story, it has to peak at the very beginning. You have to tell us what happened. What was the most interesting, valuable, impactful piece of action from this story? And you need to tell us in the earliest part of the story. So Huntsman frees girl from wolf's stomach. That's the headline. Not that Little Red Riding Hood was delivering wine and a slice of cake or cake to her grandmother who was unwell, right? So here it is. Huntsman Marvin Singh yesterday freed 6-year-old Stacy Little Red Riding Hood Batiste when he cut open a dead wolf at a cottage in the Rio Claro forest, right? Now, when you're doing your exercise, I'll allow you to Trinidadianize the story a little bit by adding names and adding locations. So like the Rio Claro forest. And in Trinidad and Tobago, you know, a person could be named Stacy Batiste, but have a completely different middle name or nickname. So a community name or a name that people in the village or people in her neighborhood or people in the community might call her. So it actually does read a little bit like, and of course, this is just an exercise to show you how traditional stories are told and how new stories are told and the difference between them both, right? But Huntsman Marvin Singh yesterday freed 6-year-old Stacy Little Red Riding Hood Batiste when he cut open a dead wolf at a cottage in the Rio Claro forest. Now, of course, everyone knows, and it's not made very clear in the story, because we're telling the story to children, that it would be impossible for a wolf to eat anyone and for you to rescue that person from that wolf's stomach, right? It would be impossible, right? But just to show you something about structure, this is the structure, right? We immediately, after we tell people what happened, go to a quote from Marvin Singh. "I could not believe it," said Singh. "I killed the wolf and cut it open. The last thing I expected to find was a young girl." Stacy left her home that morning to take some cake and wine to her grandmother, Eunice Smith, who was also rescued from the wolf alive but scarcely able to breathe, right? Now, the reason I like this exercise is because it takes a story that we're all familiar with. And when I say all familiar with, you don't know every single detail. None of us can remember all the immediate details from when we were children about this story. But it takes a story that we're familiar with and changes the order in which we tell the story, And then, of course, now the whole story isn't written for you. After the Huntsman quote, you can go to Little Red Riding Hood Center, right? So we know that she was sent. We got up to here. Stacy left her home that morning to take some cake and wine to her grandmother, Eunice Smith. So we know that. Promise to be careful. We get a quote from the mother. Now, a person, if you get to interview the mother, you can you put in a quote by the mother. So this is how a reporter would do it. A reporter would say, whose voices do I need to hear from? Whose voices do I need to hear from? Clearly the Huntsman, clearly Little Red Riding Hood, and if we could get a quote from the mother and maybe even the grandmother. But the grandmother is very unwell. She's barely able to breathe. The Little Red Riding Hood would tell us that she was tricked by the wolf. How she was tricked. The Huntsman would say, how I heard the wolf snoring and killed the wolf. Little Red Riding Hood, towards the end of the article, might say, as long as I live, I will never leave the path by myself to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so. The wolf is dead at the end of the story. Residents call for improved taxi service. The residents calling for improved taxi service might have to do with Stacy Batiste having to walk to her grandmother's house. Now, notice that you don't necessarily need to hear from the residents, but it's a nice touch at the end. And if a reader didn't get to the end, that's fine. We would have heard all the pertinent information at the very beginning. And if a reader didn't go past these 3 paragraphs, they wouldn't need to know anything else necessarily, because they would have known what happened. They would have known that a huntsman rescued Little Red Riding Hood and his grandmother and her grandmother. He was immensely surprised that this was even something that could happen. We know where it happened, in the Rio Claro forest. We know who the main protagonists, people are, or the main characters of this news story. The huntsman, the grandmother, the Little Red Riding Hood, and the wolf, all featured in the first 3 paragraphs. In the actual story, you just meet the huntsman to the very, very end. And that's what I want people to, that's the approach I want people to take in the exercise that we're going to do now. Now, it's approaching 11 o'clock, and this is the exercise here. You are to write the first 2 paragraphs of a news story. Notice I put news story in capital letters on any of the following fairy tales: Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, Hansel and Gretel, the Gingerbread Man, Pied Piper. And I would say any other story that all members of your class are likely to be aware of. So any other children's story, because I just put 4 up here, but any other children's story that all members of your class would be familiar with, you know? And you're gonna write a news story based on what happened in any one of these. And if you think about Pied Piper, and that's a public health hazard, right? This entire village is overrun by rats. Gingerbread Man involves some murder at the end, or some death at the end. Hansel and Gretel involves a hostage crisis, kidnapping. And Goldilocks and the Three Bears involves, to a certain degree, a certain amount of theft, and house invasion. And I wanted to show, just before we started, a YouTube video. It's just a 2-minute YouTube video from a very, very famous news agency in the United Kingdom, in England, called the UK Guardian. So the Trinidad Guardian gets its name to a certain degree from the UK Guardian, right? And it's a commercial from the UK Guardian on the story, another story that all of us are reasonably familiar with, called the Three Little Pigs, right? So it's a 2-minute video from the UK Guardian on the Three Little Pigs, the story of the Three Little Pigs, right? So I'm just going to show this here very quickly. It's a 2-minute video, and then we'll jump to the exercise. I will pause it at one point to show you the headlines, right? Okay, so I just paused, and then this is the only time I'm going to pause it. This is the headline: Big Bad Wolf Boiled Alive. And these are the sub-headlines. Now, again, when you're reading a story, you read the headline, you see the picture, and then you might read these bullet points here. Cooking pot horror in suburban brick house. Cooking pot horror in suburban brick house. Pigs claim they acted in self-defense. Family and friends pay emotional tribute. Police in urgent appeal for witnesses. This is a real thing that always happened in Trinidad. Police in urgent appeal for witnesses. But Big Bad Wolf Boiled Alive. That's the headline. That's the headline for that particular one. So I'll let you see the rest of the video. It's only 2 minutes long, and then we'll come back and get started on the exercise.
Little pig, let us in! It's a police! Move!
The third little pig is now being taken into custody, so the spotlight is once again shone on the grey area of homeowners' rights to protect their properties.
This isn't right. The 3 little pigs are the victims. He down 2 houses. We got what he deserved.
But the pigs went too far.
People have every right to defend your property.
Kick the chinny chin chins up, fellas.
Boiling someone alive hardly constitutes reasonable force.
Somebody is going to break the law and intrude on you.
You can't protect yourself in your own home.
A man's home is his castle.
If someone tried to blow my house down, I'd do the same.
I knew the wolf. There's no way he could have blown down those houses. He had asthma.
The wolf had asthma. So what's the truth about the pigs' houses being blown down? Inside job.
There's no reason why those 2 houses, one made from straw, the other from wood, should have collapsed. Not even a healthy wolf's huff and puff could bring them down.
The 3 little pigs have confessed to conspiring to commit insurance fraud, framing the wolf in an attempt to cover their tracks. Their motive was financial, as they struggled to keep up with their mortgage repayments.
Guilty. I can empathise with the pigs.
I'm behind on my payments too.
How could this have happened?
I've lost everything.
All right, so it was that commercial, which, by the way, that advertisement had won a number of awards internationally for in in competitions where commercials receive awards, that particular commercial won a number of awards because, again, it took something that people knew or were familiar with and inverted the narrative and changed the narrative entirely, but also showed how a story could impact public perception, right? And of course, the story takes there's creative license in the story, of course, because that's not how the story goes. But if you look at the way modern storytelling is taking place nowadays, people are taking very established narratives and artistically and creatively and inventively changing up those narratives to present something different to the audience and give people different perspectives and different experiences of a particular narrative, you know? So what I wanted people to do for this exercise, and I'm going to share my screen again here. Right. What I wanted people to do for this particular exercise, and you're free to look up what the actual stories are for any of these 4 stories. And as I said, you can add stories to it. If there are other stories that you think that your class will know about, I just put up these 4: Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, Hansel and Gretel, Gingerbread Man, the Pied Piper. You could look them up online and then do a news story version of those stories, or any one of them. And what I want to do is give you about 25 minutes to work on it. It's now, I said no, not 25 minutes, 20 minutes. It's now 5 minutes past 11. I'm just going to give everyone 20 minutes to work on it. And then I'm going to come back and we'll share the stories that we worked on. I only want the first 2 to 3 paragraphs. And essentially the first 2 paragraphs would be fine. If you get some momentum going and you write a 3rd paragraph, that's fine. But I want to see that you are able to extract from any one of these stories what the actual news story would have been. And just like we did with the Red Riding Hood story, you have, and just what the UK Guardian did with the 3 Little Pigs story, I'm giving you a little bit of artistic license to modify some of the details. And of course, you could Trinidadianize it by using Trinidadian names. Marvin Singh seems like a very Trinidadian name for some reason. Stacey Batiste seems like a name that we would have run into in the media. Eunice Smith. All these seem like names we would be familiar with in Trinidad and Tobago. The Rio Claro Forest was used. So you have the liberty to make it as Trinidadian as you want. But what I really am looking for in the way that you put together your story is your ability to write, to get to what happened in the story and what we must know about the story, what we as the reader must know about the story. So where is the news in the story? I don't need to know all the details about porridge and chairs that were comfortable or uncomfortable and beds that were uncomfortable and uncomfortable. I really need to know about the story. What is it that we need to know? Those details could come in the middle of the article, but what is it that we need to know at the very beginning of the article? So that's what I want people to do. You're writing the lead, yeah? So let me just give everyone now about, I'd say let's rejoin at 11:22 gives you about, or 11:25. We're going to rejoin at 11:25. At 11:20, I'm going to check in on you and see how far you've gotten to. But at 11:25, I'd like people to start sharing their stories. Yeah. All right. Right, everyone. So I'm happy to resume today's session. We had a little break where all our students were working very diligently on an exercise that we gave them. And we're just going to interact with our students and see what type of work they were able to put in and what type of ideas they were able to come up. It's just a first draft, and it's also work that they had to produce at great speed because they were only really given 20 minutes to put it together. But let's see what we have so far and what we could use as a platform for building something that's even more fleshed out and better for later on. So who would like to share first? Actually, Vanessa, coming to you, and you will go first, but I want to just ask people to put on the chat what particular story they worked on, or which particular children's story they worked on. So you could just put that in the chat, and Vanessa, you can go ahead and start for us. All right, so Camellia said she worked on Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Great. Right. And this is Vanessa sharing, I think.
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay, good. Good. So it's a good start. This is Vanessa, right? Vanessa, this is just yours alone?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So Goldilocks and the Three Bears, a young girl named Goldilocks visits the home of three bears while they're away and tries out their chairs, beds, and food. After she leaves the house, the bears came home and discovered that their belongings have been defiled. So actually, like that last line about, or the last couple of words there, after she leaves the house, the bears come home and discover that their belongings have been defiled. That's good, because that really captures where that there's been injustice, that there was an intrusion into their home, the intruder into their home interfered with their things, tried out their things, used their things without permission. So the good thing about that opening line, or that opening paragraph, is at least you arrived at what the injustice was, right? And the second paragraph says the story goes viral on social media. One publishing house now wants to rewrite the story. Okay, good. So I would say actually your second line could be modified and made into the first line. And then the first line could be modified and made into the second line. So the first line couldn't be something like a young woman enters into the house of a family and uses and damages, because she does damage, I believe the little bear's chair ends up getting damaged, I think, or some of the furniture gets damaged. So you say a young woman enters into the house of a family, damages their belongings, damages and defiles their belongings, and leaves the home in disarray. And then in the second line, you say Goldilocks, Miss Goldilocks, and maybe give her age, and then say what she did, which was try out the chairs, beds, and food, you know? So that's actually, you have the beginnings of a nice news story there, and you got to the crux of it. So that's a good start, Vanessa. Thanks so much. And thanks for going first. It's not easy to go first. I'm really pleased that you went first and helped to warm up the room for the others to go. So thank you. Let me see who would like to go second.
I'll go.
Okay. Thank you, Camellia. So Camellia, you go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready for us. So I'm letting everyone read it in their minds first, and then I'll read it out loud. All right, Camellia, this is really good. I really like this. So I like you gave it a headline, which is good. Family of three robbed. And actually, headlines are meant to be quite short. So if you say family of three robbed, that's fine, right? So family of three robbed, full stop. Well, not full stop, because headlines wouldn't have full stop, but family of three robbed is a nice tight headline. You don't necessarily need to lead with the date, but oddly enough, when you're reading a newspaper, the hard copy of a newspaper, generally people presume what you're telling us happened yesterday. If you're reading it on social media, it could be that it happened a couple hours ago, or it happened today, right? So you don't necessarily need the date, but I appreciate that you put it there, because you are trying to locate where the event took place, right? So let me see. On Monday, the 13th of July, 2021, the Bear family came home to a girl whose name is allegedly Goldilocks on their child's bed. This is, by the way, very good, because this story is actually a very soft, gentle story, but you actually make it sound like a crime, which is what it is. And that sense of violation, you captured that very well. The Bear family came home to a girl whose name is allegedly Goldilocks. I like that, whose name is allegedly Goldilocks, because we can't confirm it, on their child's bed. I mean, think about that. Just think about, like, in your own lives. If you have a younger sibling and you come home and find somebody sleeping on your younger sibling's bed, how appalled you would be, you know? The family said that Goldilocks ransacked their beds, broke their son's expensive chair, and ate one bowl of freshly made porridge and attempted to eat two, which were no longer usable. And I have to tell you, Camellia, this is a wonderful detail. The fact that he ate, or Goldilocks ate one full bowl of freshly made porridge and attempted to eat two, which was no longer usable. So didn't complete eating the two, but had really defiled it by dipping in and tasting it and determining that it wasn't good enough for them or whatnot. So what you really did a very good job of capturing, that no massive valuables were stolen, but the break into their house and the intrusion into their house and the violation of their house is what many people complain about when their house is broken into. And when their house is broken into, they feel terribly violated, that strangers were in their home, and their home is sacred to them. It's their space and it belongs to them. It is their home. And to have strangers just come into your home and ransack it and treat your stuff poorly really hurts people emotionally, you know? So even if you haven't lost many valuables, you just are angry that someone came into your sacred space, you know? That day, the family arrived home at approximately 2:30. By the way, this is very good too, your second paragraph. That day, the family arrived home at approximately 2:30 when they noticed their door was open, which was not how they left it. As they proceeded to, and then they went and investigated, and then they started to notice. What you're doing well in that second paragraph is that you're taking us through their experience. So you're actually narrating their experience, and you're taking the reader through their experience and the anxiety and tension and distress of discovering their house open when they got home. So I think you really did very well with this exercise, because you took what was a children's story and converted it into a news story, which isn't easy to do. And this was really well done. I think, like, it actually contains the crime, it contains the violation, it contains the injustice, and it's relatable. You help the reader to feel violated too by what the family went through. And I like that you refer to it as a family, you know, not just three bears. It's a family. It's a mom, a dad, and a child, you know. So well done. Thank you very much, Camellia. Good, good. Anyone else would like to share? Who's my third person to share? Right, Miss Titus is... Right, we are finishing up our piece. We're working on Goldilocks. Right, okay, good. Yeah. Faith, good. Oh, wow. I like how this is going. So everyone read it quietly first, and then we're going to read it out loud. All right, this is Faith. Faith, Faith, right? Faith, this is really, really good. This is really good. I want to start with your second paragraph, because actually the second paragraph is really clever. So we'll go to your first paragraph just now, but the second paragraph is it's a really strong second paragraph, and it fits where it is where it's supposed to be. And it could come later on too. It could come later on as well. It could come in the middle, but I like that it says this incident has sparked a conversation about the balance between human curiosity and the need to respect forest inhabitants. That's interesting, because most news stories are supposed to spark some type of conversation about a particular issue. So you say, well, why are we reporting on crime all the time? We're reporting on crime because we're trying to become a society that values peace, that values lawfulness, that values security, that values safety. So that's why we're reporting on crime. We want to report on crime so that people will pay attention to how we could reduce crime. You know, so when you say the incident has sparked a conversation about the balance between human curiosity and the need to respect forest inhabitants, in certain countries, you will have university professors and experts giving, and in this case, environmentalists talking about the balance between human curiosity and the need to respect forest inhabitants, you know? So that's really a very, very good second, third, or fourth paragraph, you know? And you say local forest authorities are now working with visitors to educate them about the responsible exploration of the wildlife existence. Local forest authorities, which is, again, so what you've done with this story is that you've infused forest management and conservationists and that sort of thing, because this is a big thing in the United States and different parts of the world where there are forest reserves and people would visit national parks and visit forests, but the way that they visit has to be managed, because sometimes people, and by the way, this happens in Trinidad and Tobago too, you go to rivers, you go to ecological spaces and natural spaces in Trinidad and Tobago, and you see people have littered, or you see, or some people go on the Atlantic coast of Trinidad and Tobago to visit, to do turtle watching. But that whole experience has to be managed, because sometimes people do not act responsibly and pose a threat to the wildlife that they're trying to see, you know? So I like that you said local forest authorities are now working with visitors to educate them about the responsible exploration of the wildlife existence. And then this is really clever and also almost a little funny, because we know what it's about, but it says, meanwhile, the bear family has been advised to reinforce their home's security. And very often in Trinidad and Tobago, the police are very often advising people whose homes have been broken into to reinforce security. So that was a nice touch, because you emphasize the fact that this is a home invasion. This is a home invasion, right? If we go to the first paragraph, and it says, in an unexpected twist, the three bears that live in the forest became the center of attention today. Goldilocks, a rather curious young girl known for her adventures, found herself inside the bears' residence while they were out. Reportedly, she entered the house and could not resist the urge to examine every corner of the cabin. While she claimed no malicious intent, Mama Bear and Papa Bear were surprised to find a little girl in their home. On the other hand, Baby Bear was traumatized by seeing her on his bed. So I want to say that the second paragraph is much closer to actually being in a news article. The first paragraph is still pretty good too. The first paragraph is still pretty good. I like what you said about Baby Bear being traumatized, because that's something that would resonate with readers. They'd read that a child was traumatized by seeing that their room had been violated, that their bed had been violated, that they came into the house and found the intruder there, and found the intruder in the young child's room. So the whole idea of traumatization and the family experiencing that was captured there. I guess the only thing that I would have modified is and quite reasonably, you refer to Goldilocks in a fashion like when you say a rather curious young girl known for her adventures. That's fine, actually, that's fine. But that more is the storytelling aspect of it. So that's a little more, and which is quite understandable, because the well-known established narrative is a story. So you gave a detail from the story. But I think the second paragraph, I'm really impressed with that second paragraph, because that second paragraph, you had to come up with entirely, that would have been real news reporting. You know, you would have had to talk to forest authorities. You would have had to look on social media to look at the conversation happening and the people's reactions to this human intrusion into a natural habitat, you know? So I like the second paragraph. The second paragraph is very strong. The first paragraph is pretty good. First paragraph, we could always modify a little bit in terms of maybe making it, dropping a few of the details from the story aspect of it. But overall, though, I'd say that second paragraph is the strongest second paragraph I've seen so far. So thank you very much, Faith. Well done. All right, let me see another one if possible. Who else would like to share? I'm not seeing the young ladies from are the young ladies from the young ladies from St. Joseph Convent San Fernando still here? I'm not seeing Miss Titus any longer in the gallery. Okay, well, we got Vanessa to share, Faith to share, Camelia to share. Sharona, would you like to share? I'm not sure if Sharona's hearing me or if she's able to share. All right, there we go. Nice. All right, Sharona, thank you very much. I'm just going to read it in my mind. Everyone can read it in their minds, and then we'll have a look. Right. Okay. Thanks so much, Sharona. So Sharona, I want to say this is a good start. This is a good start. This is like you taking notes to build your story. So this is you taking notes to build your story. You have the elements of it there. I like that you try to give physical descriptions of Goldilocks. The physical descriptions might come slightly later on in the article. But you are also getting into things like the sense of violation. So like when she went into their house without their permission, she sat on their chairs, leading to one being broken. She tasted all their food. Actually, when we do read about home invasions, sometimes a detail that really infuriates people is hearing that criminals broke into your house, stole jewelry, stole money, but then had time to go in your fridge and also take some of your food as well and sit down and eat. And that really sometimes angers people because they kind of go like, well, it's one thing for you to steal what was obvious to steal, but then you actually went and like made my home your home by taking food out and eating, and you weren't even trying to get out of my house quickly. You were trying to almost habitate, take possession of my house and inhabit it and make it your house and behave in that way. And I think people really do feel violated in that sense as well. So it wasn't that they stole the obvious things, but it was also that they went and did something that almost was meant to hurt the occupants of the house, to hurt the feelings of the occupants of the house. And that's actually something that gets people really angry because they kind of go like, these criminals bold-faced, boy. Not only are they breaking into your house, but then they actually liming, they're liming in your house. So I would say you're capturing some of that. And I would say what you have on the page here would make good notes for building on what your first paragraph and second paragraph would be. So your first paragraph might be, again, the idea of, and I actually like that you said that she went from being Goldilocks to now being associated with the three bears. But for that to happen, you might have to almost do what the UK Guardian did with the three little pigs, which is to say Goldilocks was arrested, and now she is associated with this crime that she's committed. So she was known as Goldilocks, but now she's known as Goldilocks in the Three Bears because she was arrested. She was apprehended for a crime that she committed. Yeah. So I think overall you do have the elements of it there. And as I said, you have good notes for writing a good strong opening paragraph. And remember, everyone, the opening paragraph for any news story is called the lead, right? So you have a basis for writing the lead paragraph, and the lead paragraph usually captures the details. And the first two paragraphs generally captures all the details of the story that we need, to the point where we almost don't need to go further and read any more of the story. Yeah. So thank you very much, Sharona, for sharing with us. I see Miss Titus is trying to get back in. Yeah. So they may have something to share with us before we call it. All right. Hey.
And we are back.
Right. Good. So you're back.
Yeah. And the girls would like to do the presentation. We apologize. We're already having a lot of technical issues on our side.
We're very happy that you still made the effort to come back in. So we're just really happy that you made it back in. If your students would like to share their work, it's two of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if they may have worked on it together. If they did, they could share it collectively, or if they did it individually, I'll have a quick look at it.
We did it collectively, the two of us together.
Good, good. Glad to hear that. So you could go ahead and share your screen and we could have a quick glance at what the text looks like. Great. Wow. Okay, so we're going to read it on our minds and then we're going to read it out loud. Yeah. All right. Great. Great. So let me just have the names of the two persons who wrote it. Just first names would be fine.
Arissa and Alexi.
Alexi and Alicia.
Arissa, A-R-I-S-A.
Arissa, is that right? So Alexi and I think Arissa, you could put your name on the chat too, so I can see how it's spelled. I just wanted to say this is really,
I think she had
really
it on the chat a bit earlier.
Right.
And it is Arissa.
Arissa, okay, great.
Yes.
So Arissa and Alexi. I have to say this is really well done. I think you all use the examples that I put forward, but it was really, really Arissa and Alexi. Thank you, Arissa and Alexi. Yeah, congratulations to you. Congratulations to you both. I think this was really, really well done. And somewhat, what I like is that it really captured Trinidadian culture to a certain degree in it. A family returning from a vacation. I like that you made them business owners, Grizzly Enterprises. That was clever. I have to say, I like your paragraphing because your paragraphing looks like a news article. So you see how the paragraphs are short. Each paragraph is roughly 1 sentence long, and the last paragraph is 2 sentences long. Your sentences are short and sharp. And when I say short, not very, very short. They each contain enough details. So I like how it says the owners of Grizzly Enterprises, the Grizzly family, returned from their vacation to discover 12-year-old Cyan Goldilocks Cross asleep on their 7-year-old son's bed in their family home in West Moorings. So you give us who, you give us where, you give us when, you gave us what happened. Not yet why, and that's fine because you don't have to deal with why until a little bit later on in the article. Family of 3 returned from their vacation in the Bahamas. You also, by the way, gave us a sense of the socioeconomic class of the victims. And so in addition to them coming home from a vacation, in addition to them living in West Moorings. So oddly enough, you're giving us an opportunity to visualize the situation. You know, you're giving us enough detail in not a lot of words to visualize the situation. That's really a very good talent. If you could give us details in short, some people take 3 paragraphs to say what you're saying, and you're saying it very fast. Speed is really important in the age that we live in, and you're saying it, you're giving us those details very fast, right? The family of 3 returned from their vacation in the Bahamas when they discovered their household belongings scattered and broken. Moments later, their son, James Grizzly, called out to his parents, reporting that there was someone asleep in his house. So I like the immediacy of that. I like that there's some danger involved, that the child discovers someone sleeping on their bed. I also, by the way, like that you made this partly about youth delinquency. Because Goldilocks is a young person, and you transfer that to the actual news story, that this is about youth delinquency. Goldilocks is not a hardened criminal. It's almost as though this was a joyride, or she made no effort, in a sense, to escape. You know, she really was creating mayhem and vandalism, but she didn't really make an effort to escape, because it sounds as though she's a hurt child, or a child with experiencing some type of dysfunctionality or mental breakdown or challenge. I like this last sentence where it says, it was reported by the Cross family that Cyan had run away from the family home due to an argument with their mother, or her mother, Sheila Cross, which is interesting. It's interesting. So the whole way, the sociological way that you all handle this story is very, very clever, I'd say. And that's what people look for in a news story as well, you know, not just the facts, but they want to get color, and they want to get atmosphere, and they want to get culture. They want to get a sense of the society that they live in. And they want to feel empathy, yeah? They want to feel empathy for people. They want to feel empathy for the people who've been violated. But some people want to also feel empathy for the people who might be seen as the antagonists in the story. And the antagonist in the story is Goldilocks. But you actually, in a sense, try to at least create some rationalization for the behavior. And that's a really, really good touch that you put into the article, because a reporter is not supposed to come and say, please feel sorry for Goldilocks. You know, please feel sorry for Goldilocks because she's a young girl and she didn't mean to do this and she doesn't have judgment. You put in enough facts there and enough details there for us to make up our mind. For us to make up our mind and for us to determine it. You didn't tell us what to think. You just gave us the information and you said, listen, come to whatever conclusions you want to come to. So to do that in 3 paragraphs, I have to say, is very impressive. It's really impressive. It's very good work. It's really good work, and you all really handled it well. It was really funny and interesting. And when I say funny only because this is, you know, a satirization of Goldilocks. But so in that sense, it's kind of clever and satirical, and in the same way that Little Red Riding Hood and the 3 Little Pigs would have been a little bit funny. But you all took what was an established story and really made it a new story. Really made it a new story. So this is, I'd say, very good work. And even though it's only 3 paragraphs long, it's almost a complete story. In the sense that 2 paragraphs more and you're pretty much finished. So I congratulate both of you, and I want to congratulate, in fact, all the students who put the effort in to come up with this exercise. I think everyone brought some intelligence and talent to the exercise and really made the effort to try and take something that is a traditional story that we know is told in a certain way, to try and make it into a new story, which means that it was going to be told in a completely different way than we know it. And I think everyone made a very good effort. So thank you very much. And thank you particularly to Arissa and Alexi. I'm glad that we stayed on and you all were able to make it back in. It was definitely worth waiting on for. So thank you.